Long ball is going to go for a touchdown. The game's over. Webster Slaughter.
Metcalf will go for the score. Unbelievable.
45-40. Run, William, run. He's got blockers in front. 5. Touchdown. Joshua Cribbs turns disaster into a score.
Sight wants it all on this one for Logan, and he is there.
Jim Brown to the 30. Jim Brown is going to go in for another touchdown.
The Cleveland Browns select Baker Mayfield.
Wow. It is Baker Mayfield.
I woke up feeling dangerous.
Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to another episode of the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am your host, Anthony Joki. As always, I got Jack McCurry rolling with me, but we also do have a special guest with us. We have Stephen Thomas, a.k.a. Browns Mock Draft, hanging out with us tonight as well. How you doing, Stephen?
Life is a cabaret. How are you gentlemen doing? Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem. We're hanging in there. Jack, how you hanging over there?
All is good on my end, boys.
Yeah, you know, it's been a very interesting time the last month and a half or so, and at least
what's going on?
Yeah, what's going on in the world? We have no idea. But you know, at least we kind of have some kind of normalcy this week with the NFL draft coming up. It's the first sporting event in about a month since all this pandemic stuff started. So we actually kind of have a little bit of normal week this week with the draft, and we want to get Steven in here because Steven is a madman and has done the Browns daily mock draft experiment this is year 4, right?
Correct. Yeah.
This is year 4 of this. So he's kind of become a resident expert. So, you know, we wanted to get Steven in here, get his thoughts about the draft coming up on Thursday. And before we talk about the draft, we just kind of want to get your thoughts on the Browns offseason so far with some of the additions that they have made with Austin Hooper, Jack Conklin, among others. What do you think? How do you think the Browns have done so far this offseason since we haven't talked to you in a little bit?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say I prefer the term madman to the term expert going forward. So, but I think, you know, I'm pretty much in line with everybody else. I think they've done a good job. They've added at positions of need, at places that they wanted to add, and they've done it at, you know, for the most part, reasonable pricing. I mean, everybody remembers, you know, months of arguing about Jack Conklin in Browns Twitter, and a lot of that was based on, if you'll recall, the prices that were being thrown around were 17, 18, 20 million a year. And this wasn't from, you know, Twitter randos. This was from people plugged in who's, you know, normally year after year, they've earned a reputation. They throw out numbers like that. They're pretty close to it. And at that price, I was in the camp that, no, this is a great tackle class. Let's just draft 2 and, you know, have Lamb be there for the swing guy and go from there. But we got him at what, 13 and a half, 14, whatever it ended up being now. I mean, if that was the number that had been thrown around, I'd have been like, yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, the guy's in his mid-20s, top half of the league, you know. I mean, not a perfect fit for what we think Stefanski's offense is going to be, but pretty good fit and does what he needs. And so I would have been thrilled if you had told me that from the jump. Hooper, same thing. I honestly, to be perfectly frank, and people search my Twitter feed, I didn't think at the prices that were being thrown around they were going to invest that much in a tight end. I would have loved to have had him, from the jump. Who wouldn't have? But I didn't think they were going to spend that much, to be perfect. I thought they were going to try to find like a late stage free agency blocking guy like a Blake Bell or somebody like that, and then try to grab one in the draft. But the fact that they got Hooper is fantastic. And, with the rest of them, they filled guy. I mean, Goodson is not, doesn't set the world on fire, but he does the job. His job is to be in there and eat up snaps and do the job and not do anything spectacular, but also not beat you. And so that now they don't have to force a linebacker pick. I mean, there are some guys at value, and I'm sure we'll get to it later, that if they go at the value that a lot of the media boards are saying, they could certainly, I mean, Logan Wilson and guys like that, I'd be glad to have those guys on my team. But they don't have to reach. They don't have to force one now because they've got a guy there. And they've done that a few places. So far, I mean, I think I'd give them a solid B, which, you get Bs consistently, you graduate with honors. So I'm pretty happy with it thus far. And all of the stuff that we have heard, the things that people have pieced together, the context clues about what's going to happen this weekend, I'm fully confident that they're going to really do a good job this weekend. I think we're set up, if there is a season, to have a pretty damn good season coming up this fall in Cleveland.
So we're coming into the draft. We had the 10th pick, and it's obvious that we're going to take a left tackle at some point, whether it's at 10 or where we move back. Steven, you've done, I think, 180 around that number of mock drafts over the last several months. If you were Andrew Berry and you're sitting here Thursday night and the 10th pick comes around, who would be your preference at pick 10? Whether they're going to be there or not, like, who would be your top target in terms of draft prospects?
I settled on Andrew Thomas a couple of months ago, and I've really seen nothing to move me off of that. Now, I've also said for a long time, and I remain this, that any of the top 5, everybody's been talking about 4, but any of the top 5, I personally would be okay with. From what we have gathered, it seems like they have narrowed it down to 2 in Andrew Thomas and Tristan Wirfs. And so a lot of people believe, and I probably fall into this camp if you force me to make a choice right now, that right now they're looking at if Wirfs or Thomas is there, they will stay at 10 and make a pick. If those 2 guys are both gone, well, then we've heard rumors about Denver and Atlanta and Miami and Philadelphia and Minnesota and New England and all these people that are talking about wanting to make big jumps up to 10. So there could be a pretty robust trade market for 10. And with the day 2 talent in this particular draft and how it matches up to some of the positions that they need, I gotta be honest, trading down, like for instance, if it was Miami, just picking one of those teams at random, and we got 18 and 56 and maybe a 5th rounder or something next year to throw it in, but the bulk of the trade is 18 and 56 for 10. I'm going to be happy with that, because the gap between 41 and 74 right now, there's a lot of guys that I really, really like that seem to be falling into there. So that would be a great pick to add right there. But if you ask me right now, if Andrew Thomas is going to be there, am I going to pick him and walk away and be happy? Absolutely. If Andrew Thomas is on the board at 10, they're not in the room this year, but every other year I would say put your phone on Do Not Disturb, fill out the card, and run it up to the podium. So that would be my guy. It would be Thomas, and then Wirfs, and then probably a trade down would be my third option, depending on the board, of course.
Yeah, when you look at the rest of the tackles, when you look at Mekhi Becton, when you look at Josh Jones, Ezra Cleveland, Jedrick Wills, how would you rate those guys? How would you rate them in order? In your preference.
Jedrick Wills is an absolute monster. Now the thing that I run into is he's only played maybe a couple of snaps at left tackle, I think. He's only played on the right side. Now, Joe Thomas and Andrew Berry over the last few weeks have been very persistent, saying a tackle is a tackle is a tackle, and they don't look at sides. And if that's true, and they really think Wills would have no problem switching over to the left side, I'd be totally happy with Jedrick Wills. But as far as the guys who, if you look at them on tape, they're played, almost all of their snaps at left tackle. You're looking at Ezra Cleveland and Josh Jones and Austin Jackson and guys like that. And of that group, I would probably be most happy with Josh Jones, and then depending on where and when and the situation, whether they sign Peters or trade for Trent Williams or all that kind of stuff, you can flip a coin for Austin Jackson and Ezra Cleveland. For me, I probably would come down on Austin Jackson ahead of Ezra Cleveland. I know that's not popular right now because he's the name that's been getting all the smoke, but I've long thought that Ezra Cleveland was more of an early day 2 guy. Now, if I would like to say this, if they really truly believe that a tackle is a tackle is a tackle, and they don't look at sides, when you're looking at that so-called tier 2 group, Lucas Niang would be right at the top of that group for me personally, because before he got injured, he was pretty much thought of by all the draft people that I really respect, Dane and Lance Zierlein and people like that, as pretty much as much of a day one lock as you can get. The dude he was a beast. So if they think he could switch over, then Niang would be right there as well. But as far as the big three names that we in Cleveland have been talked about as the so-called tier 2 tackles, which would be Josh Jones, Ezra Cleveland, and Austin Jackson, I would probably rank them Josh Jones, Austin Jackson, Ezra Cleveland. And I will go out on a limb here and say, if they took Josh Jones at 10, if the situation came down that was the choice, I know it would cause an uproar. I would be totally happy with it. I'd be completely fine. You got Kendall Lamb to sort of mentor him along if he's not ready right away, but I would be okay with that. I prefer it in a trade down to the mid-teens or early 20s or something like that. But if they get stuck and their guys are all gone and they don't get any trades that they trade offers that they like, and they said screw it, let's take Josh Jones at 10, I'd be okay with that.
I just have one quick thing. Before we get to the trade down scenario, if there's any game film that you should watch of Lucas Niang to make yourself a fan of him, watch him against Ohio State a couple years ago when he goes up against Chase Young and Bosa. That was just a great performance by him, and that'll turn you into a fan instantly of Lucas Niang.
100%.
Yeah, I'm glad you talked about the Ezra Cleveland and Josh Jones stuff, because all the smoke around Ezra Cleveland just makes me think that the Browns are hoping Josh Jones falls a little bit, because I think if they do move down, that is their preferred target. Should they move down? I don't know if you agree with that or not, Steven.
I don't know. We don't know enough about this front office and the way they operate as far as smoke and leaks and things like that and misinformation campaigns. That certainly makes sense. It's a pretty straightforward, standard ABC way to operate. You make a lot of noise about a guy you don't really want. But, they also, as much as I have hemmed and hawed about Ezra Cleveland on Twitter and on other pods and things like that, I don't want to put out the idea that I don't like the guy. I do. I think he's one of a top 50 prospect. And so, people say, oh, why do you hate Ezra Cleveland? I think he's a top 50 prospect. How is that hating? I don't think he is in the same tier as these other guys. And that's just me. There are people out there who are much smarter than I am about football who see it the opposite direction, and that's okay. That's just so. But as far as your theory, I think so. That's plausible. The rumors about them being interested in Josh Jones go all the way back to like September, I think. Of course, that was the previous administration, but still, some of those guys are still here as far as the scouts and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I think if you look at it, I just recently learned, and maybe I'm late to the party on this, that Ezra Cleveland had a turf toe injury all of last year, which could explain some of the things that I don't particularly like on tape. But taking that into account, I just think if you stack them side by side and forced me in a binary choice to choose between the two, I would take Jones over Cleveland.
Yeah, I think when you talk about Ezra Cleveland, I think the one thing when you watch him is nothing's going to like stand out at you, right? It's not going to be flashy. It's not going to be good. Special. Yeah. It's not going to be like Quentin Nelson blowing people over. It's just going to be a steady prospect and a steady player down to down, and he's not going to blow you away. And I think that's what when you look at some of these other offensive tackles, they kind of flash that quite a bit. You see Mekhi Becton just throwing people around all the time. You're not going to get that with Ezra Cleveland, and maybe that's why people aren't such a big fan or whatnot. But I think that he's a really solid guy in terms of a prospect. When you talk about trading down, I think over the last couple of weeks, Stephen, the interest in pick 10 has become greatly increased. The Browns really had no leverage, right? Because they were pigeonholed into taking a left tackle at 10, and that's the pick, and that's what it's going to be. But over the last couple of weeks, we've seen teams like Denver looking to trade up. We've seen teams like Atlanta looking to trade up. Maybe if one of the quarterbacks start to fall, maybe if Tua doesn't go in top 10, that could increase the interest. Where does Justin Herbert go? So we've seen as we got closer to the draft, the interest in teams wanting to trade up, and the Browns, maybe a team that wants to trade down. Where there's smoke, there could be fire, and I think that as we've gotten closer here, the Browns have gained back some of the leverage that they may have lost, with many thinking that they're just going to take a left tackle at 10 no matter who it was going to be.
Well, I think we were talking earlier about how it appears that they've narrowed it down to 2 instead of 4. That has helped in that regard, because they've sort of given the idea that, those of us out here, we operated on the assumption for a long time that there was 4. Any of the 4 I'm okay with, and we just assumed that they would be okay with it too. But they've sort of let it slip out that at least if we can believe it, that it's Wirfs or Thomas, or they're open to moving down, and now it looks 50-50 that those guys are going to be there. So they may have created their own leverage. And then you've got the late risers and the late fallers, which I always think is garbage. But these are the ways that GMs communicate with each other without communicating with each other. So if the board goes close to what we think it's going to in those first 9 picks, yeah, the 10th pick could have a little bit more cachet than we had anticipated, even maybe 3 weeks ago, a month ago, because they're not going to have to move like way down. You're talking, Denver, that's 5 picks. So now you're not going to get, I have people, if I do a mock and I trade with Denver and I don't get their 2nd round pick, their 3rd round pick, their 4th round pick, and their next 2 first round picks, they're in my mentions going, you didn't get enough. Well, you're not going to get that to move 5 spots. It's not going to happen. I would be very surprised if they got Denver's 2nd round pick in that sort of scenario. You're looking at more of, Denver has 3 3rd round picks, which is why they could be ripe for this. You're looking at maybe the 2nd of their 3rd round picks, and maybe 3rd, 4th rounder next year, something like that. Or if you go to Atlanta at 16, you're looking at roughly the same proposition. You go all the way down to Miami, you might be able, because since they have 3 firsts and 2 seconds, and I think they have 3 thirds or so. If draft picks were people, the Dolphins would be China. They've got so many picks that you might be able to wiggle their 2nd round pick out of that. If you go all the way down to 18, you might be able to get 56 out of them too. Unless, here's an interesting wrinkle in the last couple of days, we've seen some prominent people on NFL Network hinting around that the Dolphins might be thinking about tackle at 5, which would mean they might be wanting to trade up from 18 to grab their quarterback, and 10 would be a prime spot for that to happen. So if they're coming up for a quarterback, you might be able to get 18 and 39 out of them, plus another couple things here and there. But as far as adding day 2 picks, I think if you can move down into the mid-teens, whether that be Atlanta, Denver, Tampa has been mentioned a little bit, but I don't know if Arians would be up for that, or Miami, or whoever it may be, maybe even the Raiders at 19, because they have a few 3rd round picks they can give up. You're looking at adding, some more day 2 picks, and there's a lot of day 2 talent here, and you can still get, if the media boards are close, you still have a pretty good shot at Josh Jones or Ezra Cleveland or Austin Jackson at that pick there, and you've just added day 2 talent. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Right now in my head, I'm operating, like I said, on the theory that if Wirfs or Thomas is there, we're going to stick and pick. If those 2 guys are gone and they get a pretty good trade offer, we're going to be seeing some movement. Personally, I've had enough exciting Browns day 1 drafts to last me 3 lifetimes, so I'm just hoping it's Andrew Thomas at 10, and let's all go to bed.
And everybody's been focused on, the quarterbacks. There's been talk about, C.J. Henderson going higher than expected. So, Atlanta could move up for a corner. I think we need to watch, the wide receivers because, Arizona and Jacksonville are 2 teams in front of us that could take receivers. But then you look behind us, Vegas needs a receiver. Denver obviously wants a receiver. And then I would watch Philadelphia because they have a dying need for wide receiver. Roseman loves to make moves in the draft. They're at 21. I feel like, the Browns and, there's that relationship between Roseman and Barry. That could be a team to where you could see the Browns move back, and I feel like Philadelphia would give up quite a haul because they need a big target for Carson Wentz.
Sure, going back 11 spots, that's a whole different story. That would pretty much, in my head, require 53 and probably maybe something else this year, but a pretty high pick next year as well. At minimum a 3 next year, probably a 2 next year, something in that range, and then change on both sides to even it all out and that kind of thing. They would be interesting in a wide receiver if their guy is there, and nobody knows who their guy is. But like you said, Denver for sure. When their interest was leaked, if I remember right, it was leaked with moving up, quote, for a wide receiver. They have one guy that they love out of the top, whatever, 3 or 4. And if he's there at 10, they don't think he's going to make it past the Raiders. So it's interesting because if you're looking at these trade down things, and our mutual friend Jeff Lloyd and I had this conversation offline about 3 weeks ago. And we talked about it, and then we said, you know what? I don't even want to bring it up on the timeline because I don't need the whirlwind of mentions. And then like 4 days later, somebody else brought up the double trade down idea. You could leverage, in a certain situation, you could leverage the Raiders and the Broncos against each other. Say you move down to 12 and you get them to throw in 80 because they have I think they have 3 third round picks as well. And then, from 12, then, maybe you're looking at Atlanta, their guy still happens to be there, or Miami wants somebody, you can move down again, or move down with, Philly because from 12 to 21 because they, their guy, they want a different wide receiver. And I've seen in the last couple of days some stuff about New England making a big move from 23 because there's a quarterback that they like. I don't know how much validity any of this has to it, but if you're confident in the, as we've been calling them, the tier 2 tackles, and you think you can get them in the early to mid 20s, man, you could stock the cupboard, not only for this year, but for next year, and still get your guy. Let's just say, let's say it's the Eagles at 21. They trade down with, the Raiders at 12, and then they go from 12 to 21, just as an example. And their guy is Josh Jones, and he's still there, and they grab him at 21. Well, you've just added a second, a third, a third next year, a fourth next year, whatever, 5 picks or something like that, and you still got your guy. So, this is what you mean when we talk about maximizing the pick. Sometimes maximizing the pick means sitting there and picking the guy that's staring you straight in the face. Other times, if your guy is not there and the phones are blowing up, maximizing the pick means just what we just laid out here in these last couple of minutes. Hold these teams hostage as much as you possibly can and stock the cupboard and then still get your guy. It's a fluid situation, and if it turns into a trade down situation, which it very well might, we could have a long and very interesting and hopefully fruitful night ahead of us on Thursday.
The double trade down thing, it's funny you should bring that up because I was talking to somebody earlier today about that, and I told them that I feel like that this could completely turn into Eric Mangini trading down and ended up taking Alex Mack. The infamous where you traded down twice, ended up with Alex Mack and, picks later on. I feel that that's where this could happen because, if you trade down to, 12, 15, 16 with, Vegas, Atlanta, or Denver, I could see if one of the quarterbacks falls, maybe New England wants to come up for a quarterback, like you mentioned, and that would, constitute another trade down, and you get more picks that way. And I guess when you look at this, is how far down do you want to go? How far down are you comfortable trading down to if, say, Josh Jones is your guy or Ezra Cleveland is your guy, to where maybe you could get him. Maybe you could get Ezra Cleveland at 41, but Josh Jones would require you to take him in the 20 range. How far down, Stephen, would you say you're comfortable going? Are you of the mindset even out of the first round is a possibility. Would you entertain that idea?
I would be very, very surprised if they did something like that, unless there's a veteran left tackle move coming that none of us, comes completely out of left field that nobody saw coming. It all depends. The entire double trade down, or even the single trade down, really, it's all predicated on how big they perceive the gap to be between the so-called tier 1 and tier 2 tackles. If they don't think it's that big and they think they can still get, let's say their guy's Josh Jones, they think they can get him at 19, but, not after that, then I wouldn't go further than the Raiders at 19. I mean, I think going to the 20s, we've heard Minnesota thrown around, we've heard the Eagles thrown around, we've heard New England the last couple of days. I've even heard the Saints at 24 tossed into the mix on occasion. If you're asking me my personal opinion, I think that's gambling. You could get Josh Jones still at that spot, but you're getting into the point where I think the odds are starting to go against it. That's just my personal opinion. Now, if you like Ezra Cleveland, I think it's a little safer to go a little down there. But again, this is just me talking. Austin Jackson, there are people on Brown's Twitter and elsewhere that think he should be in the mid 50s, and then you've got Daniel Jeremiah for months now saying he's got top 15 buzz. He just said it again either yesterday or today. I can't remember. And I mean, let's be honest, we all work hard at this, but DJ is one of the best in the business. So when he speaks, I listen. And when he says the same things over and over and over and over, I usually start to believe him. So it all depends on where you think. Personally, if you're asking me, let's just pick one of the guys. Let's say Josh Jones is your guy. I think 21 is about the floor as far as where I would go, unless you're just absolutely blown away with some offer, or let's say the Patriots offer includes Isaiah Wynn, which I can't believe it would happen. But, this is the point. This is what I'm saying. It's got to be an unusual thing for me to go much further than 21. But then again, I'm not Andrew Barry. He's a lot smarter about this than I am. He has a lot more information than I do. So that's about where I would go, and I would try, like I said, I would try to maximize it. If you could somehow Jimmy the lock and make it, 15 to 21 and then, or 12 and then 21, or 16 and then 21, that would be the preferred route if that's where you're going to go. But if there is a trade down and you force me to pick right now, I honestly, it's going to be one and done. I think they're going to go to. I would put my money on Denver of the three that have been mentioned the most prominently. I would say probably 15 at Denver, pick up that extra third, something next year, and then grab whoever their guy is at 15. That would be my guess if we get into a trade down situation.
So let's move into day 2 of the draft. The Browns currently have 3 picks, pick 41, pick 74, and pick 97, which they got in the Duke Johnson trade. Let's start with pick 41. I've seen a lot of people mock safety here.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some mock defensive tackle, even wide receiver, but due to the stacked wide receiver class, there seems to be a yearly thing now. At pick 41, I would go safety personally, but Steven, how are you feeling about pick 41? And give us some of your favorite prospects that could be there.
I'm with you. I think, again, we don't know what they're thinking on the inside. We don't know how they have these guys graded. But if we're even close on the media boards and how we view the roster needs and the way the talent matches up to the value of the pick, I would pick safety at this point. And it's, you got people who don't think Winfield is going to be there. Then there's people who do. And then there's people who think he's too injured and you can't count on him. And then there's people who don't think Delpit will be there. And then there's people who think he is, but he can't tackle, so they don't want him. And then there's Jeremy Chin fans. And then there's Kyle Duggar fans. And then there's Ashton Davis fans. And I, for my money, if it goes like we think it's going to go, I'm going safety here. And I'm hoping for Jeremy Chin or Grant Delpit, to be honest. But I've liked Ashton Davis. I get the concerns with his age and everything else. I've liked him quite a bit since the beginning of the season. He seems to be slipping down the board, so they might be able to grab him at 74 if they go a different route here. But if you're going to go safety at 41, I maybe even a small move up if your guy is there and you really, really like him that much. Kind of like what they did with Greedy last year, a few spots moving up, not giving up too much. Jeremy Chin or Grant Delpit would be my top 2 picks. Winfield's not far behind. I mean, he's right there. If they take Antoine Winfield at 41, I'll be totally happy. You can go defensive tackle there easily. Guys generally seen in that range: Ross Blacklock, Justin Matabuke, Neville Gallimore. Some people have Jordan Elliott that high. I'm okay with those guys. Edge is a sneaky under the radar spot that they might want to take a look at here if someone they have rated highly falls. I know that they're not completely happy, not done. I don't want to use the wrong word, but they're still open and looking to add more in the edge room. So if a guy like Okwara is there, I could be talked into that. There's lots of people who say they've been out to Boise many, many times this year to not only see Ezra Cleveland, but they apparently really, really like Curtis Weaver. So he would be on the radar at that spot. If you're talking wide receiver, it's interesting when you talk about wide receiver because you can make a case for as early as 41 here, or you can make a case for, the 6th round or later and everything in between. Like you said, Jack, it's a pretty strong wide receiver class. If you're looking at 41, I mean, they take Pittman there, or I know T. Higgins still has a lot of fans. Denzel Mims seems like a pipe dream at this point. Earlier in the process, people were still talking about him being a 3rd rounder. I never bought that. Now it seems like he's almost a lock for the 1st round. Mims would be a steal at 41, in my opinion. I like Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State quite a bit more than a lot of other people, some too. And the kid out of Penn State, KJ Hamler, and I know Pete likes Jalen Reagor quite a bit. So I mean, there are a lot of guys in that range that it probably wouldn't be my pick to go wide receiver at 41, but if they walk out with one of those guys, how are you upset with adding that kind of talent to your team? Another spot I'd like to just at least touch on here is there's been some whispers that guys like Jalen Johnson out of Utah and Jeff Gladney out of TCU, and I even heard Christian Fulton is potentially falling out of the 1st round, and that's just mind-blowing to me. I've been a Christian Fulton fan for 2 years now. If one of those guys is there at 41, I mean, I don't know that you have to grab another corner at that spot. I think they need another one, but boy, they would at least be in the conversation for me at 41, because you think about putting those guys on the same field with Denzel and Greedy, man, you've got a blanket out there on the opposing wide receivers. And then, if you can add an edge, and we got Miles and whoever your other edge is screaming off the edges, and Andrew Billings, I think, is going to be a lot better than people think he is. Man, you could cover up a lot of the issues at safety and linebacker with that kind of a group. So I don't know. It's going to be so interesting. 41, 74, and 97, you can make cases for about 5 different positions at each one of them. If you ask me, though, I'm with you, Jack. I'm going to go safety. And in order, not separated by a whole heck of a lot, I'm going to go Chin, Delpit, Winfield.
If you look at, you mentioned you could go like 5 different positions there, 41. When you look at what they did in free agency with the 1-year deals, they signed Carl Joseph to a 1-year deal, Andrew Billings to a 1-year deal, Kevin Johnson, Andrew Sandejo, BJ Goodson, all on the defensive sides to 1-year deals. How much of an impact do you think that's going to have on this? Because those could actually be kind of like a position in transition for this year. Say, all right, we're going to plug that hole for 1 year with this guy in free agency. We can't fill everything with starters in this draft. Next year, we can go grab a guy who can fill one of those spots that we signed these guys to a 1-year deal with.
Yeah, I think this is what I alluded to earlier. When you sign players to 1-year deals like this, I think some of it has to do with the salary cap, honestly, because I think the cap, we've all read the cap is supposed to blow up again next year and the year after. Now with the COVID situation. Who knows if that's actually going to happen? But I think that played into some of the things. But also what they did with it was they're kind of it's twofold. They're 1-year auditions for these guys. I mean, if Andrew Billings or Carl Joseph or whoever goes out and has an all-pro kind of year, then they've earned a 4-year extension, a 5-year deal or whatever. You sign them and you're done with it because they know the building, they know the team, they know the fans, they're already there. You got the hometown advantage and all that kind of stuff. But what it also does as it pertains to the draft is, like I said earlier, it gives you leverage to just play your board because you don't have to grab somebody at that spot. You've got that spot covered for this year. So if you're at, say 41 and nobody, you really, really want a safety, but all the safeties that you have valued at 40 or higher, or 50 or higher are gone, you don't have to force one. You don't have to, you can go, all right, well, let's look at the defensive tackle group or the edge group, like I said, or whatever, and that's the smart thing about short deals like that is, like you said, it's a short-term plug in the leak that could turn into a long-term, but it also means the leak is plugged, at least for this year. And I think as far as this weekend, that's something to keep in mind. It was very smart of them to do that. Now they have the freedom to, we always hear this every year, trust your board. They really have the freedom to do that because I can't see any place, left tackle. Other than left tackle, there's no place that, man, they have to come out of this with one of those guys. You could make a case for missing out on a wide receiver. You can make a case for not taking a corner. I don't want to do that, but you can make a case for, they seem to, not really want to spend a lot of assets on linebackers, so you could put that off till later in the draft. It's a very smart way to do business, and we have a very smart guy running our room at this point.
Into day 3, obviously the Browns have, I think, 4 other picks that day. So, like, when you get into day 3, obviously these guys, I mean, it's always hit or miss. Like, you can find the next Tom Brady, or you can get a guy like Carlton Mitchell, former Browns pick that I love. When you get into day 3 and even undrafted guys, like, who are guys that you absolutely love towards the back end of the draft?
Well, it's interesting because they have that huge gap on day 3. They've got 115, which is really early on day 3, and there's always about anywhere from a dozen to 20 guys that should not have dropped to day 3. So the first, like I said, 10 to 20 picks, depending on the year, of the 4th round are still pretty valuable picks, in my opinion, and they have one of them. So if somebody that they have rated highly, somebody in the mid-70s is still sitting there at 115, then you still should play, the positional value game, however you want to phrase it. And there's some guys currently in that range that I think, you got Davin Hamilton, who's rated in the late 90s to the early hundreds. Tyler Johnson hasn't done anything this offseason, so he seems to be dropping. Alex Highsmith, the edge out of Charlotte that everybody likes, he could still be there. There's guys in that range that could come in and be pretty much immediate contributors, but then they've got that huge gap until 187, which I would hope, if there is a trade down from 10, part of it is something, a late 4th or an early 5th or something like that, to bridge that gap right there, because there's still some guys in that range who that could come and give you some stuff. You got Willick. I can't do it. The kid out of Michigan State, Kenny Willekes. I apologize to his mother for continuing to butcher his name. You got Michael Walker out of Fresno State in that range. John Hightower's a speedster. There's still people that like Alton Robinson. You've got Antonio Gibson, the Swiss Army knife out of Memphis. Trevis Gibson, another edge. There's a lot of guys in that range that they could. But then when you get down to 187, and the last pick is at 244. These are the guys, and this is the fun part of the draft for me. Everybody, talks the top 100 to death, and it's great. Don't get me wrong, but the guys late on day 3 that you're taking flyers on, this is the time to take shots at small school guys that tore it up, or workout warriors, guys that just blew you away at the combine, and for some reason it doesn't match the tape. But boy, look at all that athleticism, or guys that produced a ton but didn't have a lot of combine stuff, or injury guys like Marcus Bailey out of Purdue is one of the guys that will probably fall into this sort of category this year. His tape is absolutely spectacular. But I mean, his knees are held together with duct tape and popsicle sticks at this point. So, you get to 187 or especially 244. These are the guys, let's say it's 244, just, as an example, and Marcus Bailey is still sitting there. If you take a shot and he plays 3 years of great football before, he gets injured again and he's done, that's a hell of a return for 244. But if you take him at 244 and he goes and he gets hurt the first week of training camp and he never plays it down for you, it was pick 244. You're not really expecting much out of it except maybe some special teams stuff to begin with. Anything you get from somebody that late is considered a bonus. So there's a lot of guys back in there. Josiah Scott is a slot corner from Michigan State who I like a lot back there. Dalton Keene is very underrated. Tight end prospect who's currently in the 150 to 200 range on a lot of the boards that I see. That's another way they could go. McTelvin Ajim, defensive tackle out of Arkansas. I mean, you've got Olawale Bedeku. He's an athletic ball of clay out of Illinois. Tanner Muse is down there. The guy just makes plays and nobody can figure out how or why. And then, there are people that say they should grab a late round quarterback every year. And there's a lot of guys in that group. I'm not going to get into it because I don't fall into that camp. But, Bravion Roy Harrison Hand is an excellent cornerback prospect that's rated late. Reggie Robinson out of Tulsa is kind of a corner free safety hybrid type guy that I like back there. There's a lot of guys in that range that I think are fun. If you can get them in, not have to give them too much responsibility right away, and they could turn into a contributor for you 2-3 years down the road.
How do you think this COVID situation is going to play into the UDFA market? Because ideally, what I would want to do with that 7th round pick is take the best guy available that you think is going to hit the UDFA market that you don't think you're going to be able to sign. That's where I would think the teams start to transition that pick to and are looking at that. How do you think that the situation is going to play out into the UDFA market with all this going on?
Yeah, that's a great approach to a pick that late, because I mean that's what 11 picks from Mr. Irrelevant. It's like right near the end. Yeah, I mean a guy, and once day 3 starts, I mean they've started feeling them out now, but once day 3 starts, all the area scouts and everybody else, they're going to be on the phones. We want you if you don't get drafted, that kind of stuff. So you would hope that they're keeping track of who sounds positive and who doesn't, and if there's a guy that they really, really want and he sounds like he's kind of, giving them the cold shoulder or whatever, then yeah, 244 would be a great, just go ahead and grab him. I mean, you're not really missing out on anything unless, again, if there's somebody you have graded 130th who's still sitting there, then grab him. But as far as how the COVID's, I have no idea. It's unprecedented, on a world scale, let alone as it applies to an event like the NFL draft, which is at its very nature an unpredictable and, soft science at best. I mean, the best in the business hit on 50% of their picks every year. So I honestly don't know. I would think most of the UDFA stuff is done via phone and text anyway. So I don't know, outside of them not being able to get in-person workouts and that kind of stuff during pro day season, that's been taken away from them this year. As far as getting in contact with all of them, I wouldn't think it would have that much difference. But again, these are the guys that, maybe they haven't seen them in person, or maybe they've seen them once, and that was, last August or something like that. So I don't know. We're in uncharted waters here. I have no idea. I do know, as we were talking about off the air before we started recording, the potential for old guys, making internet mistakes and having IT problems with this draft is just, the potential is off the charts. I cannot wait for this. This could be one of the funniest things we've ever seen on television, and I know you guys are with me. It's going to be unique. We're going to be able to talk about it for years to come, and there is just so much potential for somebody to, tweet out a picture of their foot or something. Who knows what's going to happen? I can't wait.
I swear that whenever a team has to pause timeout because they're having an issue, they have to play like Benny Hill music, because I think that's going to be the only thing that's going to be appropriate to kind of pass that time. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about maybe one of my favorite draft prospects, and I think you know who it is. Maybe going on 2 years now, looking at this guy.
Let me
Can you
guess.
could
Wide
you
receiver in Texas?
could you at least get my hopes up a little bit?
I wondered if you were going to bring him up. Well, Colin Johnson is a guy. I mean, he hasn't changed a lot in the last couple of years. He shows stuff, and he just needs to continue to work on it. I mean, if they have not taken a wide receiver, generally where I see him that would seem to be of value for us would be either 97 or 115. If they have not taken a wide receiver and he's there and they have him graded at value, I would have no problem. I mean, a guy with his tools, you'd love to have a guy like that on your team. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's completely off the table. In that same range, like I said, you've got Van Jefferson and Tyler Johnson and Antonio Gandy Golden. Those are, as far as the media boards go, those are guys that are sort of clumped together. KJ Hill, that sort of thing. So I would probably go with one of the other guys personally, but I mean, the guy's he's an athletic stud. So how would you, again, especially if you're talking about the 97th or 115th pick, you can't be mad about adding a guy like that to your team.
Peoples Jones as well. That's another guy in that kind of
Yes.
range. Suffered from very poor quarterback play at Michigan. That could be a very interesting pick. 197 or
Sure.
that 114 pick.
It's going to one position for me that's going to be fascinating is tight end, because I was studying it pretty hard before they signed Austin Hooper, and then when they signed Hooper, I looked at the roster, and I was like, okay, you got Hooper, you got Chief, and then you have, Seals Jones is gone now, but at the time you had him, and I'm blanking on the other two guys, but there are two other guys, the kid from Princeton and oh jeez, I'm making old guy jokes, and now I can't even remember.
I'm struggling with you too.
Anyway, so at that point I said, okay, well, they're done. They're not going to take a tight end in this draft. It's not a particularly strong tight end draft anyway. And my hope for them to sign Devin Asiasi was dashed. But now here within the past, I don't know, week to 10 days, word has sort of trickled out from people that, normally know what they're talking about, that they might be looking at one, not early probably, but, they might be looking at one. So I'm thinking, maybe, a Devin Asiasi or a Dalton Keene or somebody like that could come on and provide some stuff. So I'm going to be interested to see if they do anything at the tight end position, what they do, because I know I've annoyed the timeline with him for a couple of months now, but I think Devin Asiasi is going to be an excellent tight end in this league, and I would love it if he was playing on the North Shore this fall or whenever football happens.
There was also one guy who suffered an injury around the combine time, and that was Thaddeus Moss, who was really getting a lot of buzz after the national championship game, and that would definitely be a guy to look at too, around that 97 pick and the one right after that.
Yeah, I know DeGuara has fans as well, and Harrison Bryant has fans. Adam Troutman has fans, but I think Troutman's going to go before they're even thinking about it. Same with Albert O out of Missouri, although I'd like them to draft him just to hear Deacon try to pronounce his name. And then, you want to go late. I mean, Charlie T out of Portland State is a guy that I could see that 244th pick. I'd be totally happy with him. Cheyenne O'Grady, if it wasn't for his off-field stuff, would probably be in a lot more prominent conversations. And if John Dorsey was still here, you could pretty much write him in Sharpie as a Brown. But his off-field stuff has turned a lot of teams off. But if you turn on his tape for 5 minutes, you can see why people would be excited about him as far as on the field. So it's going to be an interesting, that and guard. There's a lot of people that want us to get a right guard, but I think they're going to roll this year at least with their in-house options, Teller and Forbes and maybe moving Chris Hubbard. I don't see it with Hubbard, but I've seen it mentioned. Tight end and guard, but there's some guard guys in the middle of day three that might generate some interest as well. Some interior offensive line guys. that might generate some interest. So those are two spots that it's going to be interesting to see if they actually tackle it. I would lean against it personally because I just don't think there's value at the spots where they are for what they're looking for. But, it wouldn't be the first time I've been wrong.
So we took to Twitter throughout the day today to get some questions for you, Steven, as it pertains to the draft. Dog Pound Andy was the first one to send one in, and he asked, who do you take at 10 if all four offensive tackles, and this means Mekhi Becton, Jedrick Wills, Tristan Wirfs, and Andrew Thomas, and Isaiah Simmons are all off the board? So who would you take in that scenario?
Well, I'm going to be team trade down at that point, but if we're going to stick at 10, well, I mean, the first hope is if, all those are gone and we're sitting at 10, that something freaky has happened and Jeffrey Okudah has somehow slid to 10. I find that wildly unlikely, but that would be your hope in that kind of a situation. Outside of that, I've already said I'd be happy with Josh Jones at 10, so that would probably be where I would go. But, you could also say I would look at, probably one of the defensive line guys, Brown or Kinlaw. You might be able to talk me into Yetur Gross-Matos at there because edge is a spot where I know they want to. I'm going to go ahead and throw it. This won't be popular, but, I talked about how I really like the top of this cornerback class, and I really, really think they need to add another one. I would be happy. I know his stock dropped this year, but I still see Christian Fulton as a guy who could be a number one corner, just an absolute lockdown. So if you want to go, way outside the box, that would be a name that I would throw in there. But, probably I would say Brown or Kinlaw would probably be the guy that I would take at 10 in that situation.
All right, our next question is from Hawaii Browns. If there's one place we would like to be quarantined, Hawaii would be maybe at the top of the list. But he wanted to know, does taking an elite left tackle automatically mean we win more games, or can trading back and getting a solid left tackle and adding tons of picks in the process help the team more?
I don't know if taking an elite left tackle automatically adds up in the win column, but it does take a problem off of your hands for a decade. I mean, as we've seen here in recent history with Joe Thomas, there's an old saying, the best offensive linemen are the ones you never hear about. If you hear an offensive lineman's name called during the game, it's because he did something wrong 9 times out of 10. And we did not know how good we had it. Well, some of us did, but there were a lot of people in Cleveland who did not realize how good we had it for, over 10 years. You put Joe Thomas at left tackle and you forget about it. That side of the field is taken care of. You don't worry about it. It is a huge deal. So if you think one of these guys is that type of tackle, and I'm not saying, expect them to be Joe Thomas. That's a very unfair bar to ask some 22-year-old kid to try and clear. I mean, Joe Thomas, arguably a top 5 left tackle in the history of the league. Those guys just don't come around that often. But if you think he can be a top 10 tackle in the league for 10 years, yeah, that makes a huge difference. However, I do see the value, as we said before, if you don't perceive that gap to be that big, if you think Josh Jones can be a top half of the league tackle, maybe not a perennial all-pro, but solid. He's going to go out. He's going to do the job. You're not going to hear about him very much. Maybe he gives up, half a dozen sacks a year or something like that, and that's it. And, then you can also grab somebody, in the mid-50s or the 70s, a third-round pick next year, that kind of stuff. Yeah, that can be value. That can be the better value. So it all depends on what you mean by elite left tackle. If you're talking about, a Pro Bowler, all-pro type for a decade, I'm going to lean towards that at one of the most important positions on the league. But again, it all depends on your board. It depends on your value. It depends on the trade offers that you're getting. I'm not going to, give up an elite left tackle for a solid left tackle if all I'm getting back is a third-round pick. Now, a second and, a third next year, or a third and a first next year, some huge return, then sure, that will add more value to your team. But in a binary choice like that, I probably am going. If Andrew Thomas is there, I'm taking Andrew Thomas. That's the short answer to that.
Our next question comes from Daz, and he asks, if you could trade places with one team in the draft, who would it be? The Bengals at the top of the draft or Miami with 3 first-round picks?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm assuming the situation is the rest of the draft stays the same. It's just the first round we're still the Browns. We have the Browns' current roster, but we're in the Bengals situation or the Dolphins situation. Am I understanding that correctly?
Or any other team in the NFL. If you could pick one team to trade draft picks with to have, which team would it be?
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure I understood that. So we have their first round, but then we still have the rest of the Browns picks, and we have the Browns roster. In that situation, I'm gonna go with the Dolphins. Having the number one pick is nice. We've done it, fairly frequently here in Cleveland. But you're talking about, what do they have? They have 5, 18, and 26. I mean, just apply that to this year. Look at the Browns roster. Then say you have 5, 18, and 26. I find it impossible to believe that both Wirfs and Thomas would be gone before we pick. So you're getting your top tackle. You're locking down your left tackle spot. Whoever that is, you're probably getting the number one tackle, who you think is the number one tackle in the draft at 5. Now you look at 18, there's a lot of those other names that we talked about. You're talking about Epenesa, you're talking about Gross Matosa. Kenneth Murray has fans in that spot. If you wanted to take a badass wide receiver, you've got Mims and Justin Jefferson in that range. Then you go down to the mid-20s. Now you're talking about guys. Daniel Jeremiah said, I think he said it was either 20 to 40 or 25 to 50 is like a hodgepodge every year of pick your preference. Like they're all graded pretty darn close. And so just it's whatever your favorite flavor is. So you can make a case for guys in that range going in a lot of different orders. So then you'd go to 26. And, you're looking at Christian Fulton. You're looking at your top safeties. McKinney's probably still on the board in that range. Winfield and those guys. You're talking about the next round of wide receivers that we mentioned at 41, and Jalen Reagor and KJ Hamler and T. Higgins and those guys. You could take an edge. Okwara or the kid out of Marlon Davidson out of Auburn. I mean, I would much rather have. You think about the impact of one pick, even if it's, obviously the Browns would not be taking a quarterback, so they would probably be in the Chase Young sweepstakes here at this point, or maybe Okuda. Probably, definitely Chase Young. God, imagine Chase Young and Myles Garrett. Woo, that'd be fun. If you're not talking about trading out of it. But then you compare that with the 3 names that you could get at 5, 18, and 26, and then you still have 41, 74, 97, 115, and on down the line. You could remake your roster in one fell swoop, and this draft's talent, as we've been saying for months, stacks up nicely with a lot of the positions that the Browns have deep needs at, so you wouldn't have to force a need. You'd be getting a guy at a position of need at value, which is exactly what you want to do. I would take the Dolphins situation 10 times out of 10 if I were the Browns.
When you're looking at this draft and you look at the Browns' current roster, we're pretty, we're certain Landry and OBJ is going to be there. Who is going to be the third wide receiver on this team? Who's going to be attained? Is Higgins going to be back? Ellie Brodus want to know on Twitter.
Boy, that's $1 million question, isn't it? I still have hope, as I have for months now, that Rashard Higgins finds his way back to Cleveland. Just because 2 years ago, safety blanket and security net are overused. But man, on third down, when Baker got in trouble and we needed to convert, who did he find? More often than not. They had some kind of, I'm reminded of the Coneheads line in the movie Miracle, if you remember that from the 1980 Olympic team. They just know where each other are. They just communicate well. They work well together. And, in the shit show of last year's offense, it kind of got lost, but a lot of things got lost last year. So that would be my hope. But there's also guys, I'm curious to see what DJ Montgomery does. And I'm not saying that he's going to be the guy or he's going to, be a star, but he was really turning heads last year before he got hurt. If you're looking to the draft, like we said, I think if you ask me, you can make a case for 41, but as things currently stand, unless there's a trade or they sign somebody or something like that here in these next few days, as things currently stand, I'm going to say 74 or 97 is probably the spot if they take a wide receiver that it's going to be. And so in that range, I'm looking at a Brian Edwards, or I really like Van Jefferson because he runs great routes. He understands route concepts. And when you're evaluating wide receivers, it's very tough, because there's so many different things that play into it. But one of the things that I value quite a bit is guys who know how to get open, not only how to get open, but why it works. And then when you throw the football in their direction, they catch it. I mean, it seems very simple, but the guy, he runs great routes. He has a great understanding of the routes, and he catches the ball. He's got really, really good hands. He great effort in the blocking too, for the people that are going to ask that question. So if you're looking in that range, I like Van Jefferson, but I mean, I'd be okay with Antonio Gandy Golden. I'd be okay with Tyler Johnson. Like I said, Brian Edwards, your guy Colin Johnson, I'd be totally happy with that. I like Isaiah Hodgins a lot more than a lot of people think. If you go down a little further, a guy that has gained a little bit of buzz that I used to be able to grab at the 244th pick, and now it seems like he's more in the 150 range, is Omar Bayless out of Arkansas State. I've really liked him for a long time now. I watched him absolutely tear it up in the bowl game this year, and I think he's got a great skill set. Coming from a smaller school, it might take him a little bit longer, but that's why you've got those top two guys there to teach him what it's like in the league and how to do it. So I would be happy if they decided to put wide receiver off, if they could somehow find a way to grab Omar Bayless on day 3. I would be a happy camper because I think he's going to outplay his draft slot. But yeah, I have no idea who's going to be the guy, that third wide receiver. I'm thinking, and Jake said he is breaking down what we think Stefanski's offense is going to be, because it's not going to be a carbon copy of Minnesota, despite what a lot of people on Twitter want you to believe. It's going to be similar, obviously, but it's not going to. He seems to cater it to his personnel. I think we're going to see more of the tight ends split out, both of them on the field at the same time, and one of them, playing the big slot kind of thing. You could see that with Kareem Hunt as well. He's a guy that can give you some snaps in that role. So if they don't come out of it with a star wide receiver to be that third guy this year, and then hopefully move up in years to come when one or both of the older wide receivers move on, I'm not going to be particularly worried, at least not for this year. I think they've got guys in the pipeline who could develop. And next year's wide receiver class offers another, at this point anyway, another group of great prospects to choose from. So my hope, like I said, is Rashard Higgins. If they go to the draft, it could be any number of guys. And your guess is as good as mine.
To kind of wrap this all up, do you know who the Draft Network compared Van Jefferson to as their comp?
No, I did not.
Rashard Higgins.
Do they?
Yes.
Maybe that's why I like him so much. Yeah.
Maybe. I thought that was a funny tidbit as you were talking about Van Jefferson. I kind of remember seeing that earlier today when I was on there digging through some stuff. So, I think we all hope for Rashard to be back. That great moment we had last year in the Buffalo game. That game when he touched down, he had, among other moments he's had here as well. Hopefully that red carpet is here to stay with him, but you never know. I'm curious to see how the situation is going to play out with Marquise Lee, who was released by the Jaguars today too. I'm curious to see where he's going to go. 1 year flyer deal on him wouldn't be a bad idea, depending on how much he wants to get paid. But this is a fun week. At least we kind of returned to a sense of normalcy for a week with the NFL draft, and we all kind of get to enjoy something for a little bit, kind of take our mind off of everything else that's going on. And Steven, we appreciate you joining us. Where can everybody find you on Twitter, on all your platforms that you're on?
The easiest place is right there on Twitter, at Browns Mock Draft. You can find me there. I'm there an unusual amount, especially now. My schedule is pretty much clear until the universe explodes. So I'm there quite a bit, especially this week. This is a fun week. And I'm just, as much as I love it, I'm ready. Every year by this time, I'm ready for it to be over. I mean, I'm very curious to just find out not only how the Browns, but how the rest of the league views these tackles. Because I mean, we've been talking these 4, 5, 6 of them to death in Browns Twitter since about November. So I'm very curious to see how close or far away all of us were for all the prospects, but especially the tackles. I really want to see how those first 5 fall here coming, because I'm ready for it to be over. I need a break. But yeah, at Browns Mock Draft is the easiest place. I've got links, actually, if I can put a little plug for myself, since my career has been, like a lot of people, basically ended by the COVID situation. I'm trying to pay the bills. I've got a new CD that I put out, a new comedy CD. There's links to it on my Twitter and my pinned tweet. I've got, Spotify playlists and Pandora playlists and a comedy channel on Sirius XM that's mine, and all this kind of stuff. If you could do me a huge favor, do the link, especially to the free stuff. It doesn't cost you a dime, but every time it gets played on those platforms, I get a couple of pennies in my pocket. I would certainly appreciate it at this tough time. And everybody, please just stay safe. Whatever you do, whatever you believe about all this, don't put everybody else's life in danger. Wear a mask, do the right thing, stay home when you can. If you have to go out, be smart about it, be considerate of the people around you, because it's, especially for those of us who are, in decent health and of a decent age, it's probably not us that's going to get sick and die, but it's going to be your friend's mother, the older lady with the health issue that you're going to kill because you're an asymptomatic carrier. So please be careful, please be considerate of others, and please let's all get through this together.
Absolutely. We all, you couldn't have said that any better. As we get on out here, I promise that if you listen to Steven's comedy, he is much more than just a mean guy next door. And if you know, you know. So one of my favorite videos you put out was that. So,
Well, thanks.
so be sure to check out his stuff on Browns Mock Draft. He has links up there, as well as his personal Twitter account too. It's at 15Steven15, right?
Correct.
Off the top of my head. All right. Hey, be sure to check all that out. Support Steven as much as you guys can. As for me, you can follow me on Twitter at Anthony Joki. You can follow Jack on Twitter at Jack McCurry08. Be sure to follow the podcast on Twitter and on Facebook at The Dogland as well. With all that, we're going to get on out of here. We'll be back tomorrow. We are going to have Zach Jackson on the podcast tomorrow, so we're pretty excited about that. We're going to have a lot of content for you guys this week leading up to the draft and post-draft as well. With all that, we're going to get on out of here. Most importantly, go Browns.